Hi, I'm Heather Moore, and I'm presenting my PhD research on the influence of business elites and the advancement of carbon offset programs in international climate governance regimes since the Paris Agreement. This research project investigates climate mitigation action plans and business elite advocacy. I will investigate how business elites influence international climate change mitigation norms. As participants in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, business elites advocate for carbon offset programs. However, these programs are controversial and are often criticized as greenwashing, exploiting climate change vulnerabilities, and further financializing nature. Climate change requires an international climate governance response, and international environmental regimes such as the UNFCCC aim to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations to a level that will not interfere with the climatic system through a diplomatic process. The power exhibited by business elites to steer mitigation strategies through the institutionalization of carbon offsets challenges normative democratic operations in these spaces. This research project will investigate what businesses do to gain and maintain legitimization in the international environmental governance regimes. Political economy reinforces imperial power structures and hierarchies, and this research approaches the concept of carbon offsets as a method to decrease greenhouse gas emissions from a critical perspective. This scheme does not challenge the concepts of capitalism, the imperial modes of living, or the industrialization consumption habits that have been the prerequisite for the current ecological crisis. Rather, the status quo remains perpetuated. As carbon offset programs are increasingly celebrated as a solution to limit climate change, the protection of modern capitalism occupies a central position in emission reduction discourse and has led to the further financialization of nature. Seeing as the UNFCCC framework and policy goals drive climate change mitigation and adaptation action, this research is relevant to contemporary problem solving. Classical social science research into elites focuses predominantly on economic wealth of the top 0.1% of earners. This social science research will articulate the power dynamics of business elites when it comes to climate change mitigation policy and goals. This research will explore the advocacy, legitimacy, and mechanisms business elites use to persuade the international community and push their objectives. My objectives. My main general objective will focus on the direction of environmental governance and influence on global climate decision-making by elites. This research will investigate the mechanisms business elites employ to gain legitimacy and advocate for their objectives in international governance regimes. The case study for which these conclusions will be drawn from carbon offset markets used as business strategy. My specific goals will be to analyze what actors do concretely at a global level regarding the climate change topic. I will identify the ways in which business elites justify their position and goals as legitimate. I will determine the mechanisms and controls employed by business elites to maintain and increase their independence to avoid external regulation. I will establish if state actors and international organizations welcome the business elite to undertake an activist role, and I will investigate the concept of state substitution and analyze the current function of the state, legislature, and political system to determine if elites are replacing a preconceived level of the state. The state of the art. Industrialization has thrust the world into a new geographical era of the Anthropocene. Climate change is exacerbating the vulnerabilities of the whole planet. It will lead to a world that is deeply difficult to inhabit, and as humans have proven to be an agent of change in the geological makeup of the globe, interdependencies have also become clear. The environmental crisis also reveals a civilization crisis. Technology has accelerated at an unstoppable rate, paired with the desire for continuous improvement determined through an economic lens. In the complex social systems of the Anthropocene and globalization, flexibility is key. Democracy is an important tool to be able to assess climate change-related risks and to achieve law and policy which supports climate mitigation policies. Climate change has prompted environmental social movements, especially over the last 3 decades. Citizens of the world are collectively demanding that global decision makers work to limit ecological catastrophe. The UNFCCC is the world's answer to transnational environmental governance. The organization was founded in 1992, just after the onset of contemporary globalization, and the framework is meant to strengthen states' capacity to manage climate change. The UNFCCC has successfully orchestrated several pledges from the international community aimed to mitigate climate change. The organization offers an avenue to support a global mindset of we, and this is especially crucial for marginalized groups as they advocate for their interests transnationally. For global climate policy, the UNFCCC must establish positive freedoms to tie experiences together. The collective action of environmentalist social movements require reciprocal recognition developed through concrete universality, the normative framework to establish transnational democracy, and connect social ontology with positive freedom. Global actors that influence the public sphere should have the absence of restraint and agency to make choices and realize transformational growth, which will be best achieved through democratization. Point 2, the public sphere is constantly evolving. Since 1989, civil society is no longer confined to the borders of the territorial state. It is possible for like-minded civil society groups to join in different parts of the world to address similar demands, not just to international governments, but to global institutions as well. It has become more complex, and strong political actors make public opinion more easily manipulable. The contemporary global public sphere is dominated by the state, market, and NGOs rather than a rational, critical, debating civil society. The UNFCCC offers an opportunity to meet social movement demands to limit greenhouse gas emissions. The public sphere connects with the discoursive ambiance within the UNFCCC, especially the Conference of the Parties. Market-based solutions, however, play a central role in the UNFCCC-supported climate mitigation projects. Neoliberal economic preferences led to global decision makers to strengthen commitments to quote-unquote sustainable development. This research project will outline the ways in which the public sphere has evolved in the last 3 decades and the ways in which it can accommodate environmental governance through the democratic processes and by challenging the economic and hierarchical status quo. My third point of the state of the art is the financialization of nature. The UNFCCC reports discuss the crisis of capitalistic societies such as biodiversity loss, climate change, rising inequality, and weakening democracy. Identifying the underlying causes of these challenges, capital overaccumulation requires a radical approach. However, much of the international community discusses the ways in which capitalistic tools are not contradictory to, but rather the key to socio-ecological transformation. The common political strategy supports the notion that economic growth remains desirable and competition will lead to win-win solutions. The mechanisms of capitalism are seen as prospective drivers of change. At the UNFCCC level, there seems to be a firm belief that economic and political institutions are capable and willing to drive forward a transformational process. When decision makers describe carbon offset markets or green capitalism as transformative, they are not challenging the concept of global capitalism. Rather, it perpetuates a business-as-usual mentality that echoes the sustainable development dialogues of the 1990s. Since the ecological crisis has gotten so much worse in the last 25 years due to unsustainable production practices and commodity consumption, this is an inappropriate approach. Even as the green economy forms new ecological contradictions, even pursuing these avenues of capitalistic sustainability are not embraced fully by the international community within the UNFCCC. The Anthropocene is a quasi-imperial domination of capitalism from the West onto the rest of the world. The industrial way of life has prompted the modern ecological crisis. The geological agent nature of the human species came about because of industrialization. Historical understandings must combine the capital and species history chronologies. In transnational environmental governance diplomacy, public goods should be prominently featured and elevated above sectional interests. At the UNFCCC, sectional interests are too prominent, the discussions are too generalized. The discussion should be more deliberative, characterized by transparency and an empowered public sphere leading to consequential decisions and measurable outcomes. My fourth section of the state of the art, specific business cases, I will develop throughout the course of my research. Once I have identified the specific business elites and carbon offset programs which I will be investigating. My research project will focus on two main concepts, environmental governance and business elites. Elites are defined as people who are at the top of the pyramid of social, economic, or political power. The concept of elites is a group of people who have corporate or political power whose goals overlap. They steer decision-making in a way that undermines democracy. Classically, elite research has specified that elites are people who occupy positions of financial and social wealth. Instead of dividing actors into elite, ruling class, and upper strata, my research project will define the sample of business elites as key decision makers with influence, resources, and power that is recognized by their community. In this case, that will be people who have successfully influenced the international environmental governance community to establish carbon offsets as a climate change mitigation norm since the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015. The normative challenges of the Anthropocene have not been met through contemporary environmental governance. Within the UNFCCC, the market takes a center role through the lens of business groups, as well as development project and climate finance interest groups. Civil society does not make decisions, but rather influences decisions. Political efficacy demands of civil society should become laws, and while this does happen to some extent, it should be more seriously prioritized. Environmental policy should be overhauled to incorporate ideas from outside traditional environmental policy paradigms. Collaboration and institutional arrangements must centralize planetary justice and climate risk and offer practical solutions to global climate change. This study will offer insights into the socialization of business elites in the international climate governance sphere. The data collection will likely include a quantitative element as I record carbon offset industry growth as it relates to the interview subjects, but it will predominantly be qualitative. After interviewing business leaders and industry decision makers who participate in the UNFCCC COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland next week, I will better understand the goals, interests, and approach to engage political decision makers. By using a process tracing approach, the research will reveal the actions taken by business elites that influence international environmental governance decision makers and other international actors, such as investors. My research will predominantly be based on interviews that I conduct with the target elites, but I will also gather press releases from the companies themselves, social media accounts postings from the business elites, and I will draw conclusions on the influence of business elites on normative governmental organizations through documents published by the UNFCCC and other international environmental governance organizations. I will draw conclusions pertaining to what this means for the duty of the state, whether or not the group is striving to substitute the state, and how this impacts the role of democracy in international climate change mitigation treaties. The activities that will fulfill my objectives is identifying, contacting, and eventually speaking to and gathering data from elites. Starting next week, I will attend the UNFCCC Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland. This field research will be exploratory in nature. I plan to meet with business leaders in this space. From there, I will determine which contacts are elites and how to pursue learning about their backgrounds from a sociological point of view. Once I have the contacts, I need to put together a meaningful questionnaire to answer my objectives. That is, how they justify their positions and goals, what mechanisms they use to limit state oversight, their perception of how they take on an activist role, and their perspective of how their work contributes to climate justice. As I conduct my field research over the next 2 weeks, I planned that next year in 2022, I will narrow my focus, deepen my contacts, and to have a more defined questionnaire and understanding of business elites when I attend the COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt next year. In 2023, I will have my first draft done, and I intend to attend the COP28, location undecided, in order to pin down my conclusion and future research, policy, and practice proposals. By 2024, I hope to have my final draft by mid-year. Thank you for listening to my proposal. I am unfortunately on the train at the moment on the way to my field research at the COP26. I will be logging in to hear your comments. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.